Visit us for updates and shows at AffinityXtra.co.uk.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are personal and do not necessarily represent the views of Affinity Xtra.
Hey, welcome everybody to episode 2 of the Your Money, Your Life podcast. I'm your host, Denzil Edmeade. And this is where we talk about how do you grow and become wealthy, but not wealthy just in regards to money, but mind, spirit. And I'm not going to touch about health. There's another show. Check out Mikey Spice for that. But I'm really interested in you becoming holistically wealthy. So in this 30-minute show, if you're new to this, we're going to cover topics on money, and I'm going to read stuff that's really in the news, personal development, and God. But let's start with money. Now, I'm really keen on you increasing your financial IQ, right? Because in a world, if you look around now, the one thing that's messing everybody up, the thing that's stealing everybody's joy, the thing that's really ruining our economy and even the world is a lack of financial IQ. That's not just from individuals, that's from nations, and that's even in business. All right. We're seeing collapses of businesses. We're seeing governments go broke. It is crazy out there. So it's so important. It's so important that you increase your financial IQ. Now, one of the topics I'm going to talk about is still about housing, because I think we really need to hit this housing thing, and because so many of us are linking our wealth to our homes and stuff like that. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. But I want to say this. Last week, we touched on setting goals and the importance of having goals set. I want to ask you a question. If you watched the last episode, did you go out and write down your life goals in the 5 F's that we talked about? Okay. Now, if you didn't listen to that show, the 5 F's, 5 areas of your life that you should be focused on and have clear goals that you're going to attack. Okay. 1 is finance. We'll get back at that into a minute. Number 2 was your faith. Okay. Or if you're not a believer of God, spiritually, right? Because we are spiritual beings, right? So, but you know, I'm a Jesus believer. So my faith, I look at that. Friends and family, fitness and fun. Those are the 5 areas of your life that will determine when you look back at your life, if your life was a success or not, right? Those 5 areas. So we're going to talk about money, finance. What is your goal? Do you have a goal for this year? Is it, I want to earn more money, okay? And not just a vague goal, but I'm going to, if I'm earning 25,000, this year I'm going to go to 36, right? And let's just do that. Let's just break that down. So let's say, so you say, Denzil, I'm not really the person to be a big picture thinker. I can't think past this year, especially when it comes to money, because the money's so tight. I'm like, do you know what? I get it. I don't agree with it. I think you should have a bigger picture, because like if you think about how the Bible, okay, even if you're not a believer, if you think about the Bible and how that story manifests itself, it's this great hope. And I was reading this in the book of Isaiah of what it's going to be like in the new heaven and the new earth, right? So that dictates what I do today. What happens in the future, your vision of the future will dictate what you do today. But let's say, for argument's sake, you're not a big picture person and you can't, think past this year. The goal should be, if I'm on 25, how do I get to 27? How do I get to 30? How do I get to 35? Whatever your goals will be. What would ever make your finances better this year? And one of the things that will make your finances better this year is, yes, do the cutbacks. Yes, manage your budgets. And we'll get into that over the course of these series of podcasts. But one of the key things that we're going to be talking about is, how do you increase your money? You should be thinking about, how can I increase my money? Right? Now, I'm not going to go into this topic a lot. It's not really my focus of today's session. But let me just give you some little tips. Educate yourself. Right? If you're not an entrepreneur, all right, in terms of you're going to create a business and you're going to grow your wealth that way, okay, one way, if you are inside a company, is become an incredible entrepreneur. If you're not someone who's got the ability to set up a business, you don't have that, that risk characteristic, why don't you become an entrepreneur? Take all the skills where you see something in a business and you're like, I think we could do this better. become an entrepreneur. And if you're not an entrepreneur, just be very good at what you do. Maybe you have to upskill yourself. Okay, and by upskilling yourself, you can get a promotion. Because the one thing that I can tell you now that is happening in the world of work, good people are still hard to find. Excellent people are still hard to find. So if you're excellent, I don't care if it's a chef, a mechanic, an author, a marketeer, a salesperson, you can get a pay increase this year. Because that is one of the sure ways of hitting your financial goals is increasing your finances, increasing your income, right? Let's use that as a financial IQ word, is that there is income, okay, and there is expenditures. That is a profit and a loss account, all right? And you need to know these words. You need to work. The first part of any company's balance sheet is what was the income, and then we'll look at the expenditures. The bigger the income, the more expenditures you can have, right? Within limit. So I want you to set a goal, simply write this down. How much am I going to earn as an increase, whether that be a percentage or a numerical number increase that I'm going to have next year or within the next 12 months of 2025, okay? Now, I want you to understand this. My mind is all over the place. I got so much I could share with you. But what you have to understand is this. By writing that down, a number, you're telling your mind, which is a computer, what you want. You're telling your mind what you want, okay? And your mind will create scenarios and find and filter in the information that you need to be able to do that. So write this down. Write down how much you want to earn. Write down how much you want to earn and be a goal setter, then become a goal getter, right? So before you can do anything else, become a goal setter and you will differentiate yourself from everyone else. So I just wanted to follow up on that because I don't think I mentioned that enough, but we're going to go into different ways you can earn money, not just upskilling, and maybe we'll do an episode on that. How can you earn more money? I have different multiple sources of income, like, I can tell you now, for my general, I've got my general income, I have my property income, but sometimes I'll just flip a deal, a property, I'll just source it, that's $2,000. I did some medical thing the other day, maybe another $3,000. Just easy money, right? That money's out there for anybody, okay? So let's get back to what I want to talk about. So the first segment of our show, we're always going to talk about what's in the financial news, okay? Things that are in the financial news that I think that's important for all of us to know. Now, one of the things that's been in the financial news is that there has been a surge in mortgage defaults, okay? Now, this is the longest stretch of mortgage defaults since 2007, all right? We're having, and this is in the Telegraph, right? So there's been an increase year on year for the last 2 years. That is significant, right? That is significant. And basically what this is highlighting, okay, and the Bank of England is saying is that the rising defaults means that there are more pressures on everyday family members to make their mortgage payments, okay? The economy is not good. It's getting tight for people. And if you don't learn how to manage your finances, you're going to fall into this number because it's increasing. Okay? It's increasing. People that you'll probably even know who are maybe acting like they're all bougie could be the same ones who are struggling with their own finances. Now, where has this all come about? Let's think about this. A couple of years ago, debt was really cheap. Okay? So what does that mean, right? And this is where we have to start to build up our financial IQ. Debt was cheap in terms of the interest rate on the debt that you borrowed. So let me give you an example. So before, I would buy a house, okay, and I'd buy for investors as well, and the mortgage rate was around 2%, okay? Now that interest rate is around 5.2, 5.4%. That can mean that if you had like a mortgage, and let's say, for instance, you borrowed debt of £60,000, let's say, for instance, okay, I could have in payments on an interest only of about 170, right? And we had mortgage payments of 575. We're making some good cash. With the interest rates, if you came out of a fixed period, so you had it fixed for 2 years or 4 years or 5 years at 2 point something, right? And you were only paying £150, okay, per month. When you came out of that period and you looked for a new mortgage and a new product, it was now 5.5 or 5.25. Now your payments have gone from 170 to maybe 300 or 275. So you just lost 150 to 200 pound of cash flow like that, right? But also it meant that people's mortgages had gone up, right? And what we're seeing is more people coming off the cheap debt loans and going on to higher payments. And they haven't budgeted for that. They haven't budgeted that their mortgages. So like on my mortgage, for instance, I was paying 600 when it was in a fixed period. Then it went to 850, an extra 250 pound that you've got to find. Now, if you don't have the margin already within your budget, that's when you're going to start to have defaults because you can't make those payments. But the problem is mortgages sounded really good when the debt was cheap, right? And the problem is that we all thought that interest rates were going to stay historically, and they were at historically low values forever. Now, what you have to understand, at one point in the days of Margaret Thatcher, they were like 12%. So even 5% now is cheap, right? So when we had 2.5, there's no way we should have been assuming, okay, that was going to last forever. But we did. And loads of people bought stuff that they really couldn't afford because they believed that the debt was going to be cheap forever. So let's have a look at some of the stats. Okay, so homeowners in arrears, okay, in the latest studies was just under 100,000 people. 100,000 people, okay, are in mortgage arrears. So remember that owning your home was the dream, right? Until it isn't. Owning your home is a dream until it isn't. Owning your home was great when the interest rates are super cheap, but now they're not. And the problem is we don't know where they're going to be, right? We can bet that they're going to get lower or more. But here's the thing. It wasn't just normal homeowners. We were also seeing buy-to-let landlords going into arrears. Now, why was that? Because you think, well, hold on, the tenant's paying for my buy-to-let. So why am I having issues? Well, the thing is, those, people haven't bought the right property. They didn't do the right numbers. Okay. So they thought, hey, I got a great deal here, basing it on their mortgage always being low, right? But what we did as investors, we always put our margins. We said, does this property wash its face, even if it was at 6%? And it did. So when it had the increase, we were still, investors that we bought for, and even within our own portfolio, we were still making cash. But a lot of people didn't do that. So now these properties, okay, even after the tenants paid and the mortgage, they're not making any money, especially when you take in the higher taxes. But why is that? All because of a lack of financial IQ. Now, I don't want you to be hit with the same problems. I want you to be someone who understands what it is they need to do. Because, understand this, playing with debt is good until it's not. Now, we think, okay, this is only for, the homeowners or, small-time people. Okay. And what you'll hear, especially if you're like people who love to read, and I read loads of the books, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I probably got about 6, 7 of his books, and everything was about debt leverage, right? Everything is about debt leverage. So you've seen a lot of companies debt leverage because it was cheap debt. So they were growing at phenomenal rates until, hear me again, until the debt wasn't cheap anymore. So let's give you an example. Recent in the news, okay, the former owner, okay, tycoon, okay, gentleman called Rene, who owns Selfridges. Now, Selfridges, going to Oxford Street, the big department store with all the designers. You got one in the Bullring, you got it in Manchester, you got that yellow bag. The owner of Selfridges, who only recently sold Selfridges recently, probably I think it's like a year and a half ago, 2 years, bankrupt. His property empire collapsed. The guy who owned Selfridges. Why? Because they had so much debt leverage that when interest rates went up, company came falling down. And we don't want you to be in that situation. So how do we safeguard that? So for those who are looking at, one day I want to be a homeowner, okay? Or I want to own properties, whatever it may be. Some of the things that, I want you to think about is, do you know what? Be wise when it comes to debt, right? Now, the thing is, we've been sold that debt is king, but that's when debt was cheap. But look how many companies have collapsed. Even Asda was in the news because Asda was bought out of debt, right? Then when the interest rates went up, everyone started to panic. Even the government started to panic about how they were going to start paying back, obviously, their debt leverage. So I want you to understand this, is that we're going to talk more and more about properties because I think it's a key thing that's going to hit a lot of people, right? In most people's lifetime, they're going to buy a property. But do you buy it correctly? Do you buy it in? And there's no right or wrong way. I'm just going to give you different opinions, okay? And the consequences of those opinions. But let me discuss something, is that I don't care if you buy or you rent, this is going to be the biggest expense in your life. So you got to get it right. Where you live is going to be the biggest expense in your life. So surely you should be getting it right. And surely you should be like a genius in this area. But I guarantee you so many people are not. So many people have no clue when it comes to this. And they're just buying out of emotion. So we don't want your dream to become a nightmare. We want it to stay a dream. So here's some bullet points, right? Just to help you out on this. I want you to know, even if you're buying a home, right, and you walk into that beautiful home, right, and you're going to get emotional, remember that you have to take the emotions out of it when you're dealing with numbers, all right? Yeah, you can fall in love with the house, but then you got to get logical. Then you got to go, do the numbers work, okay? Because understand this, homes are no longer homes now. Everyone classified their homes as an asset. Before, back in the day, everyone bought a home for it to be a home. Now we buy a home because it's one of our assets, okay? And we put it in our asset folder. This is my asset. And we want to see how much the house has grown, how much equity I've got in it. It's now no longer just about a place where we have our home. So if you're going to think about your home as an asset, okay? Now, some people will say that it's not an asset because it doesn't pay you whilst you're in it and it actually costs you. So it's actually not classified as an asset. But in the main, most people will classify their property as an asset, okay? So if it's an asset and you're putting it as something in your financial portfolio, should you not have a financial IQ to make sure this is a good asset and not a liability? So that's number one. Don't buy emotionally when you're dealing with an asset. You have to know the numbers. Number two, okay, what's your buying formula? Do you have a formula when you go to buy a house? And what is that formula? Now, I have different scenarios that work for me, but there's loads online. Think about, how long do you want this mortgage for? When do you want to pay it off? And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But you got to know what's your formula. What makes a deal good or what makes a deal bad based on your criterias. But most people just buy a house, okay? But you've got to know what your formula is. Then set clear limits. The problem is when debt was cheap, we went crazy and we had no limits. We were just buying properties that we really couldn't afford because the banks were like, yeah, this is affordable until it's not affordable. Because what they don't tell you when they're selling you these deals, okay, is that, yeah, you can get it at 2%. Yeah, you can get it at 2.5%. But what happens when it turns to 5%? An interest rate. What happens when it turns to 6%? So you've got to know your limits and say, okay, in the worst case scenario, if interest rates go up to this, can we still afford it? Is it within our limit? And set a limit of how much proportion of your income you want to have towards your housing. Now, as I said to you before, unfortunately, people's income ratio, so their cost of living ratio to their earnings is creeping up every year. I think the average was now probably about 36%. Imagine when it's almost 50%. Imagine going to work and at your paycheck, you look at your paycheck and you get paid £2,000, £1,000 goes on a mortgage. And you still got to eat. You still got to put, petrol in your car, take care of the kids, right? It's too high. So set your boundaries. Second, the other thing I would say, buy when it's the right time for you. It's okay to rent. Let me say this. It's okay to rent because understand this, owning is good, yes, right? And I would recommend everyone sooner or later to get into ownership. But my daughter, okay, is now living in Paris. She finished her degree. She decided she wanted to live in Paris, went to Paris, contract didn't work out. She went to go and live in LA. Then she lived in LA, realized she didn't like it. Now she's back in Paris. Now, she can't do that if she owns a home, okay? And worrying about who's renting it and this. She's got freedom. So it's better for her just to rent places. There's a season, and I would encourage young people not to settle down into properties yet and just save your money for a bigger deposit. There's a right time to buy and there's a right time to rent. Figure out when is the right time for you. Is it a time where you need to be flexible looking at your career? So, if you're a young person, you've just graduated or you're starting off your career, I wouldn't be buying a house. Why? Because I want the flexibility to say, I'm going to go where the opportunities are. And it may mean that you have to move city. It may mean that you have to move country. Why would you place residence on own a home and have the headache of that when you're trying to be flexible? Now, once you've got your career, once you've got a good deposit saved, okay, and your debt leverage is going to be small, that's when I would do it. But don't do it yet. But that's just my criteria. But buy it at the right time and don't over leverage. Do not over leverage. You see, when people are owning, one of the days I'm gonna give you the history of how debt started, and you'll be fascinated. You see these mortgages that we've got now, 95% mortgage loan to values. You couldn't get that 30, 50 years ago. Wasn't there, right? Okay. But obviously banks wanted to make money and they wanted more. The only way banks make money is when they loan out debt. You have to understand this, right? Banks are not your friend. They are there to make money for their shareholders and for themselves. So imagine this. If I say, and you think about why house prices have grown so much, right? If I say, okay, we were only, when we start to use debt, we're only going to lend you 50% of loan to value, right? So if the house is worth 100,000, you got to save up 50 and we'll give you 50%, right? So low risk for the banks, okay? But it meant that homeowners had to save. And because there was less people being able to purchase at that time, it kept the cost of houses low because there's less people in the market. But banks said, we want to lend out more money. Okay, so what do? Well, okay, we're going to change the loan to value and we're going to go to 60. And okay, so 60%, which means that you only have to put down 40%. So guess what? There's more people to buy. But what happens when the banks say, and they went to a ridiculous place where they went up to like 99% loan to value, where you only had to put down, if it was 100,000, you only had to put down 1,000. That means everybody could have bought then. Which means if you flood the market with loads of buyers, guess what? Prices go up, right? Supply and demand, all right? Because there's more buyers, there's less supply. So, when there's less supply, the price of anything goes up. So banks don't care that the property prices are going up. They just care that they're able to loan out more money and you pay more interest. That's all they're interested in. So you have to make sure that you don't over leverage. And that's why I would say to you, before you buy, save up a big deposit because you're going to get better interest rates. Okay, if you only put down, 5%, guess what? Your interest rate's going to be higher because you are classified as high risk. But if you put down 20%, you're less of a risk. So your APR is going to be lower. And all of that makes a difference. Just check it out. Go onto any mortgage calculator and you'll see how much interest you're paying. Don't over leverage. Now I'm going to talk about interest payments. Now, talk about financial IQ, right? I need you to understand how to work out interest. How do you work out interest that you're paying on your mortgage? So let's say, for instance, you bought a house for 100,000, okay? And you didn't put anything down. Right. So first thing you got to do is find out what your APR is. Okay. And you want to find the best APR interest rate. Okay. So the smaller the APR, okay, the interest rate, the less you'll be paying back in interest. So you got to find your current interest rate and then obviously your mortgage balance. So how much you are looking to loan, right? So I've got my 5%, let's say that is 5% interest rate. And I've got my outstanding debt of 100 grand. Then what you do is divide the interest rate, okay, the actual interest rate, so that 5%, and you divide that by 100. So divide it by 100, and then you get a decimal point. Then you multiply the decimal by the outstanding mortgage balance, right? So you'll get your mortgage balance. Then all I need you to then do is then divide that result by 12. Okay? So on this clip, on the show, on the notes, we're going to show you how to do this. But let me give you some interest payments. So we're going to have 5% divided by the outstanding mortgage of 100 grand, right? So 5% divided by 100 equals 0.05. Times that by the mortgage, 100,000. Your annual interest, okay, will be your whole number. Then you're going to divide that by 12 because that's how you're going to pay, right? Every month. So based on that, your interest would be £416. All right. So 5% divided by 100 to get a decimal, which is 0.05, times by your outstanding mortgage debt, which was 100 grand. Okay. Then you divide that by 12 because you're going to pay in incremental months every month. It would be £416. Now, if we did that same calculation, but the interest rate, okay, was only 2.5, not 5, do you know the payment of interest, instead of being 416, would be 208? Do you see the difference? You're going to pay an extra £200 a month for the increase of 2.5. Now, 2.5 may not sound like nothing until you quantify it into actual money that's going to have to come out your bank. So the thing is, I say, the higher the interest rate, the more interest you're going to pay. But also, the longer your mortgage, the bigger the debt, right? And I want you to think about this. So still working on that 5%, I want you to think about this now. The 5% interest, okay, on £100,000 debt. I want you to think about this. Now, most people's mortgages are 25 years, okay? So you go to a mortgage broker, it's 25 years. If you take out a mortgage for 25 years and you paid the average of 5% across the period of that mortgage, so it took you 25 years to pay off, do you know how much interest you would pay? What do you think that number is? Well, let me tell you. It's going to be £75,000. So you took out 100,000 and you paid back £75,000. So guess what? Do you think it's in the interest of the banks for you to pay off your mortgage early or to have a smaller mortgage? It's not in their interest, right? Why? Because they've just made £75,000 from you for doing what? Nothing. They don't own the house. It's your house, right? Okay, they have the title deeds until you paid it off, but they just made 75. Then you times that by the number of homeowners in the UK. Do you see how these bankers are getting rich? 25 years. But okay, let's do the numbers. What if I said to the bank, okay, but I'm not going to do 25 years. I'm only going to do 15 years on that 100 grand. Do you know how much interest you'd pay? Okay, you'd pay 33,000. So instead of paying the total amount of 175,000, you pay back 142. So instead of 75k, you pay back 42k. So you would have saved 33,000. What holiday could you have had for that? What car could you have bought for that? You could have even bought a deposit down on a buy-to-let property for that, including fees, right? Okay, what if you went gun-ho and said, I'm only going to have it for 10 years. I'm just going to smash it out of the park. I'm going to smash it out of the park. I'm just going to do it for 10 years. I want you to think about this. Do you know how much you would have paid back in 10 years? 127. So compared to the guy who had it over 25 years and the guy who did 10 years, you would have saved £48,000. Do you know, for another £20,000, you could have bought a whole house up north as a buy-to-let cash? Now, let me tell you something scary. The standard used to be 25 years. But some recent information out in the Independent, because I'm always looking at property news, I'm really intrigued by that, is that now we're offering 35-year mortgages for people who, and the average person taking out now is like 36 years old. 36 years old. Let's do the numbers. 36 years old, okay, and I take out a mortgage for 35 years, okay, I will be 70 when I pay that off, right? But do you know how much interest that person will pay over 35 years on 5% on 100 grand debt? £112,000. £112,000. Now, I want you to understand this. There's different ways you can do properties. I've said, like, if you didn't want to pay off your house, take the money that you're making, buy some buy-to-lets, and let the buy-to-lets pay for where you live, right? Or don't even own a house and buy buy-to-lets and let that pay for where you live in terms of rental, right? But what I am going to say to you, do not have a mortgage for longer than it needs to be. Hustle and pay it off, right? If you're not someone who's going to be using that other money to invest, okay? I highly recommend, because otherwise the only person, let me show you something. Debt is an eroder of wealth. If you remember nothing, debt is an eroder of wealth. And the longer you have these mortgages, 35 years, you've just spent £112,000. And most people's debts is greater than 100 grand. So I just want you to think about that. I want you to start thinking about the numbers before you make decisions, and then have a financial strategy how you're going to be wealthy. Okay. Now, if you have any questions on that, hit me up. Okay. It's a deeper subject, I know, right? Not something that you probably want to watch when you could be watching Love Island or for people like that, right? Okay. But let me show you something. Love Island ain't going to make you rich. Watching the Kardashians ain't going to make you rich. But if you start to get your head around these numbers and said, actually, I'm going to start becoming financially literate instead of illiterate, I start to become wealthy, and maybe they'll make a show about me instead of the Kardashians, of how you came from broke to become wealthy. So that's the money side. Now, I went on a little bit longer on that, but I want to give you a life lesson. We talked about becoming wealthy in different areas, right? So we just talked about money, but I want to talk about life. And I want to talk about a lesson that I gave to my daughter recently, and I think it's important. My daughter's 21 years old now. This is the one who's just gone to Paris. And we had a conversation. I said to her that, look, I need to tell you this about life. It's hard. Life is hard. It's not a fairy tale, and it's not Disney. Life is tragic and it's malevolent. I want you to understand these two words. Life is tragic and malevolent. Now, what's tragic about life? Cancer is tragic. And I've had best friends pass away through cancer. All right. It's terrible. I've had really good friends have a heart attack on the football pitch. That's tragic. You know, and you're like, how's that? That's tragic. So life is tragic. There are some things that are just unexplainable, and they are tragic. But also life is malevolent. And what does that mean? It's the word malevolent means having or showing a wish to do evil to others. Now, I was watching a program with Idris Elba on knife crime, all right? And I saw how young people now are running around with machetes and all kinds of things just to kill people, right? That's malevolent. People just doing you harm. People will come in your house and do bad things. That's malevolent. It's evil. People will say bad things about you. It's malevolent, right? So how do you stay positive in a world that's tragic and a world that's malevolent? Now, you have to find meaning. You have to find meaning in the tragedy and the malevolence. You have to find meaning. Because if you don't, what happens is you start to become negative. And if you have no meaning to your life, you'll say, well, what was the point of this life? And that's how we get, crazy people go into schools and mass murderers and things like that, because they're like, you know what? This life is tragic and malevolent, and I need to get my own back on the world. So I'm just going to hurt everybody to let everyone know how bad my life is. But the truth is, everyone's life is tragic, right? Everyone has had someone who's passed away. Maybe too soon, too early. Everyone's had someone do something bad to them. So no matter if you're rich or poor, white or black, big or skinny, muscular or good looking, or quote unquote ugly, whatever, title people will put on you, okay, you will face a life that's tragic and malevolent. So you will either be someone who goes and says, okay, because life is like this, I'm going to take it out in the world. I'm going to be a reason that the life is more tragic and more malevolent. Or you can find meaning. And why I say by this, let me pose this to you. I walk down the street and I see a homeless man. It's tragic that he's on the streets. And I don't know why he's on the streets, but it's tragic to see him in that situation. but I open my wallet and I give that guy £5, right? Have I just made the world less tragic and less malevolent? The answer is yes. So I've just changed the world. You're driving and, you're in a rush, but you see someone and you let someone in, right? You don't have to, but you let someone in. It's as small as this. And you did a person a favor by letting them in because they could have sat in the traffic because there was loads of traffic behind you. The question is the world less tragic and less malevolent? It is. Because you just did a kind act. And the reason I say that is that you've got to find meaning in this world and say, do you know what? I know the world is like this, but I'm going to find meaning in it by making it better, by being less malevolent. I can't stop all the tragedy. I can't stop an earthquake, but I can stop doing evil things to people. I can actually start doing good things for people. And guess what? The person that you just let through in the traffic, they've just said, the world's actually not that bad. There's kind people. The homeless man you just gave £5 to has just said, the world's not that bad. There's kind people. So the world has just become less tragic and less malevolent. So if you really want to succeed in this world, don't look for all the bad that's out there, because there is. Don't look for all the darkness that's out there, because there is. Be the light. Be the meaning. And your meaningful life is, I'm going to be light in a world that's tragic and malevolent. I'm going to be the light. So the world is less tragic and less malevolent. All right? Try that and see how you feel. I live by this and I love my life. Honestly, I love my life. And I feel the world is a beautiful place because that's what I'm choosing to do, is to make the world a better place. Doing this show, I don't need to do it. Listen, I got my work clothes on, I'm busy, but I'm hoping that if I can save one person making crazy decisions in their finances, I've just made the world less tragic and less malevolent. So I'm going to close out with this. I always like to close out with a scripture, okay? And listen, even if you're not a believer, even if you watch this and you don't believe in Jesus, you don't believe in God or whatever it may be, let me tell you something. There is wisdom in the good book that it applies to everybody, whether you believe or not. I'm going to read you the scripture. And it's from the book, and I'm probably going to start sharing more from the book of Proverbs. And it's going to be our theme for a season, sharing from the book of Proverbs, right? But my scripture is this. Proverbs 27:7 says this. So Proverbs 27:7 says this: the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. Now, you either take that as gospel or you don't. The more debt we have, the more enslaved we are. It's just the truth. Because understand this, it says the rich banks rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. Right now, you see, the thing is, back in the day, the Bible talks about lending. It does, but there was no interest. We wasn't meant to charge an interest, but those days are gone, right? And I just showed you examples of that. So the thing is, I want you to understand this. Every time you take out debt, and I've got, property debt and things like that, and I'm changing my whole philosophy on this a little bit, because I want to keep, what I've understood is that debt is an eroder of wealth. Debt is an eroder of wealth. I think that you should buy assets, but the more debt you have, the less assets you're buying. That's just the truth, right? That's just the truth. So I want you to think about that scripture. Go away and say to yourself, right, am I a slave? And how long do I want to be a slave? Now, we all need mortgages, right? It'd be nice if we all inherited big cash and was able to buy that £250,000 house, £300,000 house cash, right? So we have to lend, but how long are we going to lend? How long do you want to be a slave? Okay, so maybe you needed a car. How long are you going to be a slave to the car? Whatever it may be, how long do you want to be a slave? Because I would rather you be a lender than the borrower. And wouldn't it be great if we had more people who could lend with no interest? Wouldn't that be awesome? To really help people out? Because I think we do need lenders. I'm not against lenders. I'm just against the extortionary interest rates that we see sometimes. Okay, I don't think that's fair, especially for people who really need it. So listen, God bless you. I pray that you go away and work on becoming wealthy. I pray that you'll go away today and set a goal in the 5 areas. But if it's not the 5 areas of your life, finance at least. And you will say to yourself, do you know what? This year I'm going to increase my finances. Second thing I hope from the show, that you'll go out and increase your financial IQ. Understand what interest rates are. Understand how, these things have a bearing. How much interest you're going to pay on your home. Okay, how much do you want to pay? And make a goal for that. That's all I ask. So if you have any questions, if there's something that you want to know more on, if there's a particular topic around finances that you want to talk about, hit us up on the show. Give us your comments. Okay, but we're going to be, providing these more and more. Why don't you go and share this with your friends and family and say, hey, you know what? What's your level of financial IQ when it comes to mortgages? Okay, what's your goal around your finances? Maybe that's something that you guys all talk about at the pub next time you're out. Yo, let's talk about finances, man. What's our goal? Okay, let's have a challenge, Who can increase their finances quicker by 3%, 4%, 5%? Why don't you set yourself that challenge? Okay, instead, maybe you have a no spending month. I'm actually going to have a no spend February. I spent quite a bit on suits and stuff like that in January. And I was like, we were doing some work on some property. And I was like, you know what? February, I'm not spending any money on anything. I'm going to have a no spend month. Why don't you try that as well? So God bless you. Thank you for watching. Tune into the next show and we will see you soon. Bye.
Thank you for watching the content we're putting out. Listen, make sure that you are liking, subscribing and following us on all our social channels, including patreon.com. Make sure you're finding us on there to support what we do so we can support you. And remember, guys, be extra.